Welcome to the Black Table on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Greg Carr. We'll devote an hour today, as we always do, to exploring ideas and subjects of general importance and special importance to African people and others fighting for the struggle to make and build a better world. Well, we are in the week of Juneteenth. For the second time in the history of the United States of America, there will be a national Juneteenth holiday celebrated. We are very excited about that here at the Black Table. In fact, so excited that we have lined up a couple of guests to help us think through the history of Juneteenth and the meaning of Juneteenth, the first of which will help us put it in an international context and help your celebrations really pop. And then we'll get into the deeper significance of Juneteenth as it relates to Texas, the history of the United States, and the future of the United States. So let's start with some basic facts. On June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger, accompanied by troops from the United States Army, by some accounts, as many as 3/4 of them, people of African descent, men of African descent, rode and sailed into Galveston Bay in Texas and issued General Order Number 3, declaring that not only was the war over, but that enslavement was over. And the following year, the first Juneteenth celebration took place, and that was on June 19th, 1866. Now, it's very important to understand that Juneteenth is folded into a constellation of Emancipation Day celebrations around the hemisphere. Usually in the Caribbean, those celebrations congeal somewhere around the first or second week of August. In other parts of the United States, certainly during the Civil War and after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st became a very important date after January 1st, 1863, of course, and throughout the South as Juneteenth spread into Oklahoma and Louisiana and other places. Sometimes that date might fall later in the month of June or even in July or August. And all of these together are emancipation celebrations that talk really about the long freedom struggle of people of African descent. And of course, in Texas, we saw Juneteenth, thanks to a brother, Representative Al Edwards, become a state holiday in 1980. But of course, we're talking about it now in the context of the United States and a federal holiday, because in May 2020, George Floyd lost his life in Minnesota. But what many of you know, because we know our brother Roland Martin, the founder and leader of the Black Star Network, graduated from Jack Yates High School, as did George Floyd. What many of you may not know is that Jack Yates, the high school that Roland graduated from, that George Floyd graduated from, Felicia Rashad, Debbie Allen, so many others graduated from, that school is named for Jack Yates, a formerly enslaved African who came to Texas, like George Floyd's family did, from North Carolina, and was one of the formerly enslaved Africans who bought land and in 1872 created Emancipation Park, where the first Juneteenth was celebrated in Texas, in that part of Texas, in Houston. Well, when George Floyd lost his life in May 2020, the Great Reckoning began to flood into the streets of the United States and around the world. 2 years later, or actually a year later, the President of the United States on June 17th, 2021, created a Juneteenth holiday. Actually, I was actually there for that bill signing, and nobody believed that there would have been a national Juneteenth holiday had people not been out in the streets for a whole year before. And this little kind of symbolic gesture opened up a new conversation around race and around power, around enslavement, around national memory. And so today, we couldn't think of anyone better to think about Juneteenth, the rituals of Juneteenth, the significance of Juneteenth, than a sister who enters this conversation from a very unique point. She is a naturopathic doctor, physician. She is an entrepreneur and institution builder. She is a 5-generation herbalist. She is a remarkable thinker, institution builder, cultural worker, and Dr. Sunyatta, who joins us now. And in addition to everything else, she is the TEO of Calabash Tea and Tonic, an institution here in Washington, D.C., and through the internet worldwide. She's going to help us think about Juneteenth in a very special and very specific way. I want to bring her to the Black Table and welcome her. Welcome, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here with you.
Yes. No, I mean, thank you. I mean, we have a lot of, next week we'll talk to Gerald Horn, our friend Gerald Horn, who's going to walk us through the history of Texas and Juneteenth and all that. But today we were like, okay, everybody's going to be celebrating. And of course, our people have been celebrating all along in Texas with the barbecues and the foot races and the pageants and the games. But the food is significant in all human rituals. And people now who are stumbling around in the stores trying, well, I want to celebrate Juneteenth, or I want to honor Juneteenth. What do they eat? I mean, what do they do? We said, let's get Dr. Ahmed to talk about this, because you published recently an article in the Washington Post. Actually, I guess it was last week, where you talk about the significance of some of the Juneteenth foods as they relate to the celebration and the culture, and particularly the concept of these red foods. But we want to talk about that in the next segment. What I hope you'll share with us today in this first segment a little bit is more about yourself. I mean, we know you obviously from a lot of work, whether it be CNN or the Washington Post, whether all the institution building you've done, your president. But tell us a little bit about Dr. Sunyatta Ahmed.
Wow. What an intro. I appreciate that. I am a fifth generation herbalist and the descendant of Maroons, two sets of Maroons. Maroons from the Great Dismal Swamp here in the United States, and Maroons that are Jamaican. And I believe that kind of puts me in like this really awkward, strange space of being a cultural custodian. And as much as I tried to run from that as a young person, I was like, I don't want to do this work. I mean, I grew up in a health food store. My dad is an ethnobotanist by training, who also trained in Cuba in school there, at university in university in Cuba at a time when Cuba was extending invitations to high school and college students to come there for university. And the last thing in my life I wanted as a young person was to do this work, was to be an herbalist, was to, be centered in building community. And I know that may sound strange, but when your parents are activists, it's like, oh, here we go, another march. Or
I hope you don't mind, because I know we had you a couple of years ago talk to the freshman class at Howard University, and 1,500 students that you talked to. I mean, everybody was wrapped in attention, and their parents and their parents' parents know your family, because it wasn't just any health food store, wasn't just any herbal store. Say a little bit about that practice that you were literally born into one of the most important institutions, not only in New York City, but really in the diaspora as it relates to this work. Could you say a little bit more about growing up in that particular store and what that work looked like?
I was definitely the free labor in my parents' shop. And that's to say that's what community is about. A lot of times the spirit of entrepreneurship is the seeds are sown. And that's what we talk about when we talk about self-sufficiency and revolution and freedom as is celebrated during Juneteenth is our connections to our community, our business community, et cetera. I mean, that's where we see the dust ups, right? Like in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, and is in North Carolina, is when we are connected through business. And so growing up, as I said, not realizing how pivotal my parents and the folks that continued that work would be in Harlem. My dad opened in the early 70s a place called Black Pyramid. I guess Pyramid wasn't Black enough. I don't know.
Well, either way, it became legendary. When you say Black Pyramid, certain people start, oh, really? Oh, yeah. So,
right. And the offshoot of that was Tree of Life.
Yes.
And so my dad's partner and my dad and my cousins sort of shifted that focus into a full-fledged bookstore. They figured, if you're feeding people's minds, you're going to feed their bodies. There has to be this shift in consciousness. And so that store existed for maybe 25 years, and then Tree of Life up until, not so long ago. And these became bastions in the community. My dad opened 3 stores ultimately. And what I find is that people do come to me and say, oh, I know that place, or I bought books there, or I ate at the juice bar in there, and it is only as I became a little bit older young adult that I realized the importance of that particular thing, in which I had pushed away from me. So every time I thought I was getting out, they pulled me back in.
Well, you know what? I think what we might want to do now, why don't we do this? Why don't we pause and come back in the second block, and then we can get into not only your apprenticeships, but then open that into how, when we're going to have this conversation about the significance of the Juneteenth foods, all of this background and all this momentum you are now able to empty into these rituals and help us understand what we're actually putting in our bodies for this ritual holiday. So we'll be back in a moment with our guest, Dr. Sunyatta Amin, the TEO of Calabash Tea and Tonic, and the history of Juneteenth through the foods of Juneteenth. Back in a moment at the Black Table.
I'm Faraji Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to the Black Table. I'm Greg Carr here on the Black Star Network. And Dr. Amin, our guest, Sunyatta Amin, when we paused, you were telling us how you tried to get out, but they pulled you back in. I love you. I've seen you lecture and have interaction with audiences where you talk about, that apprenticeship literally stained your fingers. I mean, you're working in. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I was the golden seal girl. I was the person in charge of bagging, ginger and golden seal and turmeric. And so sometimes I'd go to school and my fingertips would be like yellow or red. And people are like, what the heck kind of thing are you doing?
Do we need to call children's services? What's wrong with this child's fingers? No, what's going on?
Well, even the other students were like, I think, I heard that she's that, they got some stuff in there. They got roots.
Oh Lord. So they had you pegged for a witch as a child. But students always talk about this when they mention you. They say, you told them you almost never got a cold or never got a cold.
I still have yet to remember a cold I got or sick in any capacity. My classmates would get full blown, chicken pox, different things that go around. I just never got sick. And I attribute that to probably breathing in all those fumes of things as the child labor. Right now, the folks who work at Calabash with me never get, and they don't notice it until I said, did you notice that you haven't been sick this whole year? And they're like, oh, you're right. And I'm like, you're welcome.
Exactly. I mean, but and then of course you go on to get professional training. You are a licensed naturopathic physician. And I think about the fact that you always talk about decolonizing our tongues. And part of that is restoring us to our natural health. I mean, people think, well, I eat this because it tastes good. But you always remind us, and I'm there because, I'm drinking out of my Decolonize Your Tongue.
Okay.
I got a rep, I
got the maroons.
Oh, the maroons. I started to rock my original Maroon 5 joint because I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later in terms of foods of resistance or even now. But, you're constantly reminding us that what we put in our bodies, makes all the difference. And so, could you talk to us a little bit about the significance of food in the body, and particularly for people of African descent, as we begin to think about those formerly enslaved people who never stopped practicing health with the foods that they ate.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up. And so many of your students, by the way, from Howard come into the shop all the time and they say, Dr. Carr said you're a whole witch. And I'm like, thank you. And the way that that relates in the decolonizing of our tongues is reclaiming lots of the things that are our traditions, that it is possible that we still say, we say, oh, that child, he's been here before. Oh, I saw a butterfly. That's my grandmother coming back to tell me something. I mean, we have symbolism, we have connection to nature. And within that, during the MAFA, during the Holocaust of being transported, millions of us in that transatlantic slave trade, as enslaved people, one of the ways that we could connect to home was the knowledge of herbal medicine, the fact that nature, not just the herbs, but nature itself connects us mind, body, and spirit to who we really are at our essence. And that's why the food is so important, because that's the way we connect internally with the way we relate to nature. And so many things were taken from us. And even in places where we were forbidden to drum or to practice traditional Yoruba ceremony or traditional Akan things, or we must remember many of us were Muslim, being taken, many imams and many Sufis, and that in the New World, in general in life, if you think about it, everything you can do to a person, you can try to control a person. But one thing that you can't really control is food. People decide they're not going to eat, or people who feel put upon decide, I'm not eating, or I am eating my feelings, or I'm not going to eat because I feel a certain way. It is something you can control as an individual. So one of the ways that we take personal power, even if it's in a disordered fashion, even as modern people in disorder, is the control of what we eat or do not eat. And that is a revolutionary act, for better or worse. It is a matter of taking back, wresting control. And so when we talk about what we ate from a diasporic perspective post transatlantic slavery, or even during that time, right? Because that was hundreds of years in the making, that we could approximate what we were used to before, and it's its own act of resistance. It's its own decolonizing or resistance to colonization that we're exercising at that point. So if we think about the Maroons, Dr. Carr, I mean, this is one of your loves and specialties, our connection, Queen Nanny, who's on our cup, right? Yes. Or Zumbi, Kojo, Makandal, Dutty Bookman. We talk about how many of them, there's the success of their revolutionary acts, Harriet Tubman, lots of folks, yes, that it had to do with their responsibility to nature and our connectivity to nature that allowed them. And so it's said that, this one practiced voodoo and they had herbs at their disposal, and this one gave herbs to their troops so that they were emboldened and strengthened. This is the food they ate. This is the sacrifices they left to the African spirits that are related to food for us. There's no way to separate it. And so in that context, as we even come to things like Juneteenth, as we come to other celebratory things that we hold in our communities, food is absolutely pivotal.
Well, let's continue that momentum as you're talking, and of course, as you talk about all those places you brought in, Jamaica and Cuba and Haiti, and put that right where we can now see this momentum of resistance, literally through with the foods that we ate. In the article you wrote on the 15th of June in the Washington Post, one of the things you talked about.
That comes out tomorrow, actually. What you guys got was the preview.
Ah, wonderful. Oh, that's perfect. So then that's right in the rhythm then. All right. So you all
comes out in the food section tomorrow.
On Thursday,
it comes out on Wednesday.
June 15th.
Yes.
So by the time folks are seeing this, it will have already come out. So you all can now access the Washington Post and see this article. And so in it, you talk about several of those herbs, those plants, and you focus in on hibiscus. And you write hibiscus plants with a lot of the other botanicals that come from Africa, like ginger and the various spices, as you said, came with us on those ships. And they not only allowed us to continue our practices, they continued to heal us. And of course, coming out of the Caribbean as you do, you also write about how over the last decade plus, that sorrel that so many people in the diaspora enjoy, it has medicinal benefits. Could you talk a little bit about what makes the red and some of these red drinks that we consume, not all of them, as we'll talk about in a minute, but some of them, what makes them so powerful? And talk about some of those herbs.
That's such a great question. Red is a significant ancestral color for us. In many of our West African traditions, red symbolizes ancestral connection and power through blood connections. And that connection doesn't have to be people you're related to. Is symbolic. And so when you talk about Shango, when you talk about Alegua, whose bracelets I have on now, both of those deities, yes. But we talk about red being a color of power. When people get married, they're often wearing red, not white. People are there is red involved in ceremony and palm wine and cola. I know Coca-Cola made this formula that people associate cola with brown, but that's because it's been dyed brown. But the truth is that cola nut, you have white colas, red cola nuts. It's those are associated with divination, with asking the creator, what's the next step, or how do I go forward? And
wait, Prof, before we go, I don't want to dwell on this, but just so folk catch that, Coca-Cola, like we drink Coca-Cola, that has roots in the Caribbean as well?
I mean, this has roots in Africa. Wow. And, when we talk about a drink like that, we're talking about the fact that it's dyed brown from sugar product. It is sweet from sugar product. It is spiced, seasoned with cola nuts, which are traditional to us in West Africa, right? It is even when they used to put cocaine in it, it was coca leaves that are indigenous to, South America, until they got busted with that. And they were like, you can't put that in.
Okay, I didn't want to, look, hey, you all, Dr. Amon's coming back to the black table. I'm just going to claim that right now because we're going to have to do a whole thing just around Coca-Cola and imperialism and Africa and the Caribbean. I didn't want anybody to miss that footnote. So that's a teaser for the next time you come. Anyway, I didn't stop your momentum. Okay, so.
No, I love that. I would love to come back and just talk about the colonization of our indigenous foods that are now superfoods in Whole Foods, and just coming forward on that. So I love that you've asked this question, and our interconnectivity, wherever you see that hibiscus plant and these other indigenous West African plants, wherever they're growing, wherever you spy them, you're seeing Africa. It's the thumbprint. It's the indelible thumbprint, because hibiscus stains whatever it touches, and it has left a fingerprint, a watermark of capitalism, imperialism, enslavement, and resistance. It's leaving its mark.
Well, you know what then? I think that's actually a perfect place for us to pause. And when we come back in our next segment, let's pick up with that red drink. Because just like Juneteenth, I've heard a lot of debate and discussion saying, well, Juneteenth belongs to us as Black people. It's not American. It's not everybody in America. It's enslaved people. And then people say, well, Juneteenth isn't part of the Caribbean. It isn't part of Africa. We are African Americans. Well, just like you said, anytime you see that red, you see us wherever it is. Anytime you see Juneteenth, you see liberation struggles wherever they are. So that's perfect. When we come back in a moment with you, Doc, we're going to pick right up and ask you about that red drink. We're going to ask you about not only its significance, but where we see it, how it connects to Juneteenth, other red drink options, And for those of you who have read the Washington Post article, Dr. Amin includes a recipe on how you can brew your own up. But we'll be back in a moment here at the Black Table, Black Star Network. Back in a moment.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
Welcome back to the Black Star Network. Here we are with the Black Table with our guest, Dr. Sunyatta Amin, TEO of Calabash Tea and Tonic. And when we left, you led us right up to the door of that red drink that we see proliferate in Texas. And these Negroes is barbecuing whole hogs. They out here doing all kind of, walk us through some of that food, Dr. Amin, because, in addition to being intimately familiar with the foods of Africa and the diaspora and what is good for us, you also talk a lot about the things that aren't so good for us and how sometimes mixing those things together can have detrimental effects. But talk to us a little bit about this red drink that we see.
Red drink, fantastic. Red drink is pivotal to any celebration. As you look throughout the diaspora, you will see red drink appearing over and over in different forms. This has everything to do with our connectivity with West Africa. So this, everywhere you go in it, let's deal with Africa in general, right? I have a list here for you, right? We have Bissap in Senegambia. We have sorrel in the Caribbean. We have Rosella in the Horn of Africa and Italy. It spread to Italy. And the Middle East, they call it Rosella, or so-called Middle East arbitrary geopolitical term.
Yes.
Let's not forget that.
Yes.
In Egypt, you're going to call it karkade.
Oh, that's my favorite. Yeah, anytime we go to Egypt, I know you've been there many times, me too. We get off the plane looking for that karkade.
And they're ready to give it to you because it's a celebration that you're coming home.
Yes. And people, we always warn the folks to travel with us. If you're on blood pressure medicine, you better be careful, because if that thing starts tasting good to you, can mess up your medication because it lowers your blood pressure.
It certainly does. It's a vasodilator. It opens the blood vessels and it releases heat from the body. It's a coolant, as they call in an herb. There are certain herbs that are coolants. And so this throws heat off of your body. And that's one of the reasons why it remains popular in tropical and subtropical regions. And as we look at it translating over into different drinks here, but even used hibiscus is associated with cooling, with healing, with our ability to survive in inhuman conditions, to be worked to death on plantations in high heats. So I still have some more.
I don't want to interrupt you. So some of these other regions, like what's the name? What other names do we have?
So in Central America, it is called agua fresca de Jamaica, or Jamaica. And so it's called Jamaica because that was one of the main landing points of hibiscus and other herbals. And I assert that, not just because my parents are Jamaican, but I assert that there's a history of maroonage in Jamaica, and that connection from Queen Nanny and Kojo and all these other folks. And when we talk about their mastery of herbal medicine, is because it was one of those places where the drum still existed, and our connection to traditional spirituality, which includes herbal medicine. There's no way to separate it. So we also have in Brazil, we have vinagreta. It can be found everywhere. I mean, you see it over and over again. And as you mentioned, Dr. Carr, things that are great for us and some things that aren't so great.
Hey, there's life. So yeah, wow. And then so then the folks brewing that red drink in whatever form they brew it in Texas, celebrating Juneteenth, are cousins with all these other folks.
We are all cousins. When we talk about Black food, I prefer that than African American food. We could definitely talk about things that are specific to African American cuisine. But we need to remember that we are one family, and you'll see these themes over and over again. And it's an opportunity for us to understand each other and create those linkages, to link back. We were separated. It just depends on where those ships landed and, having been stolen from another place. And so we are also very connected. It's amazing. So when we think about that, like barbecue, Dr. Carr, you mentioned barbecue for Juneteenth.
Yes.
The very word barbecue comes from the Arawak, the native Caribbean, of which, the Carib Indians, as we will call them, right? Carib Native American people, Arawak. Their word for barbecue is barbacoa. And so that's where the word barbecue came from, or barbacoa. And so we can't separate at all. Like there's no way to separate our intrinsic relationships with Native American people that we interblended with, literally, and then also from each other as descendants of African, stolen folk.
So, oh man, I'm just so excited thinking about this, because so many of us don't realize as Black people how connected we are and how far back those traditions go. You wrote about all that red food that is associated with Juneteenth: strawberry pie, barbecue, red rice, watermelon.
Watermelon is so important to us, and watermelon's gotten a bad rap,
Come on, redeem watermelon for us, Dr. Ahmed, today. Don't be ashamed of that watermelon, y'all.
There are people who say they won't eat it in public around mixed company. In mixed company, they will not eat it in certain settings. I've seen people eat watermelon with a knife and fork, my hand to God. If they're I know.
You petty bourgeois Negroes, put that knife and fork down and eat like your mom and them used to eat that watermelon. Why is watermelon so important, Dr. Ahmed?
Well, here's the thing. Fair enough, right? Chicken and watermelon became associated with us in a very negative capacity. And in the framework of that, I think personally that foods that we eat with our hands became villainized. So, things with a bone in it, things that we pick up and eat, it seemed déclassé because you're not using continental table manners, with a knife and a fork, which is more of us decolonizing our tongues, pushing away from that and using our hands, learning to eat fufu, learning to eat collard greens, picking it up. You go to some place in the South, people say it tastes better when you pick it up with your hand.
I know that's right.
That's because that's the way we traditionally eat. All over the world, people do that, and so when we look at our traditions of red foods, red velvet cake and red punches, you go to the Caribbean, you got fruit punch served to you when you first get off the plane, just like you do in Africa. You get the kerkade, you get the sorrel, you get the bisap. In the South, we have our own traditions, and parts of my family that are from North Carolina went to Texas. And so you find that interconnectivity of people back and forth, where red is a celebration. It says joyful resistance. It says we are still here and we deserve joy. And in the context of that, commercial enterprises like how we mentioned Coke and other makers of soft drinks and hard drinks, right? So non-alcoholic and alcoholic drinks really started to recognize these Black folks like this red drink and red foods.
Yes.
Let's see how we can color things with as much red as possible, whether it's candies and the Skittle and the, all of this stuff, the red sodas, Big Red and Kool-Aid. My God.
You're hitting too close to home, Doc. You're hitting too. I mean, as a child, I'm thinking about Red Hots. I'm thinking about those. In fact, it got so bad that we used to go to the store and we would ask for the candies and the Kool-Aid by the color. Just give me the red. You want the red or the? So are you telling me that this is deliberate? This was a deliberate marketing campaign.
Well, think about the fact, Dr. Carr, that we don't describe it as a flavor.
No.
It's not cherry and it's not strawberry, and it's not hibiscus flavor. It's red flavored.
Right.
That's how much we love the color red, especially in the drinks and the candies, like being associated with it's in our soul, it's in our DNA. It's one of those DNA memories, those places that are buried deep in us. So a company can sell you those little nasty, you remember those little links that sat on the counter?
Yeah.
Growing up in New York, we had the bodega and they had the little, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it pulled it out of the thing. I was like, what is that?
What is that? And look, all the hood joints I know, because all our Philly fam lived in Philly for a long time. Them quarter waters, it's a reason they colored that way. You write about that in the article.
The quarter water. You got the Kool-Aid is a red. It's not even called the color it is. Kool-Aid doesn't call it red.
My God.
We call it red.
We call it red. Water ice in Philly. What y'all call it in New York? In Philly, they call it water ice. But they push it.
Like the Italian ice.
Yeah, Italian ice. But it's like, you call it by the color. Give me the red.
I want the blue. I want the red.
Red.
And you could tell because everyone would walk around with a red tongue.
Oh, no,
their tongue and their mouth was red. We didn't care, And so when we talk about large food corporations recognizing our love for these things, Juneteenth factors into that, in that so much of our celebration there in the Caribbean with sorrel and pushing into our northern loves for red, it's like they say, oh, wait a minute, we can market this as a thing specifically to people of color.
Why don't we, when we come back in our last section now, why don't we come back with the implications of this? Because as we know, this is all new territory for us. These rituals that you have practiced and seen and inherited from the Caribbean, from Latin America. Now this one here in the United States, Juneteenth, has been nationalized and in a kind of struggle over what it means to remember what it means. And we already see the first forays into our community from these corporations as it relates to Juneteenth. So why don't we, when we come back in our last segment, help our viewers think through what it means to celebrate Juneteenth through the food, what it means to protect and extend our traditions, and how we can link our institutions so that we can always preserve the best of these rituals. So we'll be back with Dr. Sunyatta Amin, and we'll be talking more about Juneteenth and these foods at the Black Table. Back in a moment.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in Black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause
too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Checks and money orders go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is roland@rolandsmartin.com.
Welcome back to the Black Table. Greg Carr here on the Black Star Network, and we are honored today to be joined by Dr. Sunyatta, who is really helping us think through not only the history and meaning of Juneteenth, but the rituals, the foods, the icons, the shrines, the totems, everything culturally that is connected not only to that holiday, but it connects us as people to the best in our traditions. Dr. Amin, we're now both witness. Certainly after everything shut down, you and the Calabash team went online and expanded. A lot of people will be watching this from around the world, watching this broadcast. You led us right up to the horns of a dilemma now, because a lot of people now are going to be wanting to celebrate Juneteenth. I mean, I know that's one of the reasons that you wrote for a broader audience to help people introduce people. But there are some pitfalls probably associated with that. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that? You started at the end of the last segment talking about this, the market coming in and saying, oh, we can exploit this. What do you see going forward?
This is a great question. Just like we see traditional superfoods making their way into the marketplace, you name it, matcha and maca and hibiscus and, mushroom and, all of these foods that are now foraged, which we just call going out in the woods behind our house and grab. Your grandmother said, bring back that pokeweed and let's make a salad.
Right. Yes.
So what we do see is things like this Juneteenth ice cream dust up that occurred, where our foods start to get marketed back to us. They didn't even let that joint, no pun intended, cool off. They didn't let it cool off.
How about that? And it was too soon because they received the backlash. They're like, what? Juneteenth? But they're going to be back, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're going to start to see more Juneteenth sales and lots of things revolving around food, because that's a huge part of the tradition. And as we said, these red foods, we're going to see it more and more. And it's going to go in it's going to be a soft sell where it'll start with foods that we're accustomed to being red, like we talked about earlier. And then it's going to move into certain kinds of product. And what ends up happening a lot of times is if they can get a Black representative, then that person will introduce it. And that's where they messed up, to be honest, with the ice cream.
It's funny you say that, Doc. At the bill signing last year, they had Mother Opal Lee, the elder who is, largely associated with helping, push along with a lot of other folks. Yeah. And we were standing there. Here's Congressional Black Caucus and the President of the United States signed that, Vice President Harris. And I'm standing in the back with the cats that guard the place, which, as we know, are Black and brown people. And I'm standing between these two police officers. One young sister, she said, I'm from Texas. We've been celebrating this all along. And the brother was like, right? I said, well, what y'all think's about to happen? And they both just shook their heads and started laughing.
Right.
I mean, this is a ritual like all the other ones you're describing. It's from the people. So how can we protect it? I mean, what are we talking about at this point?
It definitely is. It's one of our traditions, and Texas is one of those pivotal places in terms of how it got its name, how that celebration has continued for all this time, and people need to acknowledge that. What we look at as a whole is that we do not want to be sold to in this consumer fashion, and when we examine it, when we zoom out macroscopically, we're being sold to all the time things that we have proclivities for. We have those proclivities. So what's happening is this will be the latest in that set of things. And red foods had already been marketed to us, but now there'll be an excuse that takes it out of the quarter water and the now-a-latest, the watermelon now-a-latest, and the hot link sausage on the counter, so it'll start shifting from the Kool-Aid into more palatable, sorbets and things that seem a little classier than what we were used to as children being marketed to. And so we'll see a push into those spaces. Now, what I do think is fascinating is the amount of Black chefs who are coming out with recipes, who are saying, this is something to celebrate. Even if I'm not from Texas, I'm going to give you what's from my place that is right along lines with that. From the Caribbean, I'm going to give you this sorrel, because I will say that I feel like our love of hibiscus drinks, not the things marketed as red, has been pushed forward by Jamaicans and other Caribbean food places that returned our traditions back to us in a North American and like a North American capacity. And that's beautiful, because it's just the snake swallowing its own tail. There is no beginning and no end. It only exists in that capacity because we're from, as descendants of the Caribbean, we're from a subtropical environment where that thing grows all the time. Yeah. So it's our responsibility to return the healthier version to our folks, instead of just the red liqueurs marketed to us, the red sodas and the other things. I mean, why does the Kool-Aid man have to sound like Louis Armstrong? He's like, oh yeah,
right, busting through walls. Right, that's true.
No manners. Oh yeah. What is that?
Wow, that just. Man, you just really are sparking so many memories for me. I mean, we grew up watching that Kool-Aid man bust through those brick walls. And until you said that, it never occurred to me the underlying cultural assumptions and stereotypes. And, I remember many years ago reading Manning Marable's book, How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America. And that was the first time I read about how the soft drink companies marketed those colors, red and purple, and for the grape and red soda, and how they really tapped into that market very deliberately, and how Black people were the consumers. And I know you know about that. I mean,
Dr. Carr, even their logos, McDonald's has red, Wendy's has red, KFC has red. I mean, Popeyes, and you name a restaurant, Pizza Hut, any of it, red is pivotal to their marketing to us. Starbucks, green. Okay, so
right.
You have to know who is
green. Right, that's true. Whoa, stop playing. Okay, so we got to come back. People are saying, you know what? I do want to ask you this before we go. You have been and continue to be one of the most successful and nuanced kind of bridge builders without sacrificing anything in terms of cultural integrity and foundation. Help us think through what we should be looking, not only what we should be looking for, but how we can meet this moment in a way that enhances our communities. I mean, you're always looking to teach, regardless of anybody's background, their culture, and we know that this flood of commercialization is coming. How can we, what should we do to meet this moment? And what are you all doing? In fact, at Calabash, you're an institution builder, you're an entrepreneur. How should we move in this new environment? This new Juneteenth environment?
This is fantastic. Our entrepreneurial spirit, which we've always had, right? Mm-hmm. You go to West Africa, people have their market stalls. The market women run the economy, right? And so when we talk about reclaiming recipes, let's call it that, reclaiming our recipes, the ingredients themselves, all of these things that are being sold and will be sold as heirloom grits and heirloom so-and-so. And it's only a matter of time. And we already saw it happen with this ice cream debacle. And the other products, right? what we have to do is decide to be those entrepreneurs, even in our own homes, reclaim the recipes, make these recipes, make them healthier versions of what we love, the same seasonings and such, but let's not cook something until it's with an inch of its life. Like, make things more fresh, use the same season. And this gives us an opportunity to lower our blood pressure, avoid sugar and diabetes issues, our risk for cancer, et cetera. This is imperative because good health is not only your birthright, but it is also a revolutionary act. Yes. And as much as I fought this as a child, I am now getting it.
Listen, y'all, here we are on the verge of the Juneteenth holiday. With the producers, we were talking before, and, they said, let's move this to the first of our 2-part conversation on Juneteenth. And, thank you for doing this, because it's going to be a lot of celebration. It's going to be a lot of noise. But when you watch this hour that we've spent with you today, this just resets the paradigm. It just strengthens us. And ultimately, our health is a revolutionary act, huh?
It absolutely is. It is intrinsic to our joy. And if it is true that every American citizen is due life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, our being able to live is pivotal to that entire flow. Otherwise, our quality of life is compromised. And that is a deliberate act with corporations. It's a deliberate underpinning of enslavement for so long, and what we were forced to eat, what we had access to. Now we're at the place where we want to make sure that we do the best we can for ourselves to increase our life and well-being.
Yes. Well, how can we continue to do that with you and with your team at Calabash? I know one of the things that you and I are involved in, building out the narrative platform, some other work we're doing, is we've been reading and discussing the work of Octavia Butler. And I know one of the new T's you've introduced is Octavia Butler at Calabash. How can we continue to support you and the team at Calabash team? What kind of things you all into that we can share with the Black Table audience today?
Well, folks can pop on our website, calabashtea.com. Folks can pop on our Instagram. We love being able to interact and answer questions. We are, as you know, we talked about these cultural custodians, like it or not, when we were younger, and we've walked it, we've leaned into it now at this point. And so that's part of it. Is also, we have Harriet's Gun Tea, and we have Garvey's Ghost, and we have actually, I was having Octavia this morning. We have Octavia Butler. We have Oshun's Kiss. Like, we love celebrating our traditional ingredients.
I got the little joint. I'm gonna come get my re-up.
I got the big joint.
Yeah, of course you do. You made it. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, I'm sorry. We love celebrating. You about to say?
Yeah, well, I love the ability to celebrate our ancestors and the people we should give flowers to now. Yes. Through the foods. And that is how we've traditionally functioned, right? So when we talk about our ties and connections to traditional Yoruba and traditional Akan and all of the things that somehow we had to leave a lot of that, we still have it and we can still reconnect. So we're here, we love at Calabash being able to have your cousins.
Yes. Well, Dr. Amin, we want to thank you, the whole Black Star Network and the Black Table in particular, for spending this time with us and helping us prepare for the Juneteenth holiday, and beyond that, for really recentering ourselves, for decolonizing our tongues, for healing us. And we hope you'll come back and join us very soon.
I appreciate being here.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap for now, and I'll be back to clear the table in a moment here at the Black Star Network and prepare for next week when we will continue this conversation and put it in a larger geopolitical context with our brother, Dr. Gerald Coleman. Back in a moment.
hatred on the streets. A horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shooting.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Welcome back to the Black Table on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Greg Carr, and we've spent the last hour with Dr. Sunyatta Amin, physician, herbalist, institution builder, entrepreneur, and she's given us a master class on not only the ritual we call Juneteenth, but the deeper significance of how people of African descent use the foods of Juneteenth, connecting them to the foods of Africa and her diaspora as revolutionary acts of self-preservation. One of the things that when you visit Sunyatta's store, when you visit her institution, Calabash, when you walk in, anyone who greets you will say, "How can we heal you today?" Well, as I said at the beginning of the show, when George Floyd became an ancestor and transitioned to the ancestors, a lot of people didn't know that he had come from Texas, from Jack Yates High School. Jack Yates, one of the founders of Juneteenth in Houston, who had come from North Carolina, like Dr. Amin's ancestors, like George Floyd's own mother, and that they connect to a long and large arc of maroonage and resistance. Juneteenth is a ritual of resistance, a revolutionary act. And so we wish everybody a happy Juneteenth holiday. And more and most importantly, we wish everybody a moment to pause, to recenter, to renew, to decolonize your tongue, to heal, and to prepare ourselves for the work that remains. So we'll see you next week back at the Black Table here on the Black Star Network.